All right. Um, Thanks for setting up the meeting and for what you said, which I can't remember now. Um,
The narrative and kind of like the gaps or areas you want to focus on for like the next steps. That's generally what I'm looking. I have a few other things we can talk about, but those were kind of the primary
yeah,
things.
yeah. So that's a good point, and it's helpful that you asked that question because I'd been avoiding um, making some decisions. So that kind of helped
Perfect.
um solidify my thoughts a little bit.
When is the last time we've taken a look at the graph
Um,
itself?
yeah, I mean, just now.
Or not, sorry, not the graph, the canvas is what I meant to say.
Yeah, the canvas. Yeah, just now I hadn't really done it before that, so it's I'm still kind of looking at it. I struggle with it because the grouping of the pros and cons and squares, which reduces the number of lines, but it kind of breaks my brain a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you.
And then
It's
also like,
interesting how the
yeah,
layouts are very specific to a single who's making it,
yeah,
I think.
but yes, that's true. But it is a very concise layout. It's good that you can see the whole thing. There's definite benefits in that pattern. Um, we'll just have to see if I can get used to it or not.
I'm interested to know what effect making just showing the aliases rather than the full claim has for you versus what it has for me. Because I'm the
Oh,
one who made them, so I kind of like I know what they mean, but I'm wondering if I took away too much meaning for someone who didn't make them themselves, then that would be interesting to
I
see.
didn't even notice, which is funny. Uh, I mean, I guess on one of them I was like, "Oh, what does that mean?" But just glancing through it, I think most of them it's sufficient and probably effective. Um, is there any way to look at the longer thing in this UI?
There isn't, and I really wish there
They
was.
don't
Like
have
that would
title or hover or expand or anything like that in this.
not that I've seen, but that would be one of the first features I'd build out. Like, for example, if you zoom in, actually, I'll just share my screen.
Yeah,
Should
that'd
we
be
do
great.
that? Okay. That one. Okay. So if I'm zoomed out to this level, what is that? 45% on my screen. I don't know how it calculates it. Can you see my screen? Is this working?
Sorry, I muted. Yes,
No worries.
that's great.
Um, when we're at this zoom level or anything less, the little icon to click on the URL doesn't show up. And so this would actually be almost the perfect level of zoom. So if I zoom in once more, well, twice more, now those icons show up to click on the URL.
Okay.
It's almost at this zoom level, or maybe a bit more, that I have like an automatic switch to show the full thing. Just kind of going back and forth. It would be ideal to have a keyboard shortcut, but
Yeah, what's
that's what
interesting
I'd look
about
into.
that kind of automatic scaling of text, of the amount of content. We've run into several problems in Miro where it does that, but it breaks some other processes. Um, but it does have benefits. So
Interesting.
I just if you're designing it in a UI, I would definitely make it something that you can turn off.
Option. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the
Uh,
UI that we like, once we can integrate this with Roam Research, you'd be able to shift click on the node and it would open up in the sidebar.
okay,
And I think
that'd be
that
nice.
that's also one way right now, because it's not completely integrated. If you want to see the full claim, you can click on it, but then it takes a while to load, and I don't like that. But that is
Yeah.
one current way you can do it. So there it is. Um, so yeah, I mean, be interesting to know, like I said, what from just this, where you want to see it kind of built out more. like if this is acceptable currently, then where do you want to see it built up more as it relates to the narrative?
Yeah.
Um,
So I had some thought about that.
hmm,
What I think that we need to get to is not actually even like, so it's a debate competition, but the state we need to get to right now actually isn't like the end of the debate, which in theory happens when everyone's exhausted. They can't find any more evidence and they can't word anything any better or move things around to make more sense, um, or be more logical or be more accurate. That's when the game kind of, it never really ends, but that's when it kind of reaches a conclusion. But I thinking it through, it's like, oh, I'm just doing episode 1. So we just need to get deep enough into it that that it provides some interesting info. It's more than just what people would know. And and it maybe is at a point where people would be willing to contribute evidence to it. So it's more like it's a game show, and it's like, there's the I guess this Great British Baking Show where they follow one group of people through like 10 episodes, right? A season, they vote one person off each episode until they're down to the last 2 people, right? Or the
right.
judges in that case, but in all the other shows. So yeah, you're following those things for several episodes, and we're just doing episode 1. So what we kind of need to do is decide what's an interesting place where the debate will be at the end of episode 1. Uh, and and really, I think it would be pretty logical and have a couple unanswered questions, but be more than just like one train of thought. I think it needs to have a couple branches, would be ideal. Um, and that would be the kind of ideal ending point. Now, during the narrative, there will be a couple places where in order to explain the rules and to kind of teach about effective debating, a debater is going to make a move, and their move is going to be countered pretty easily, right? And if you're looking at it, it's like, oh, that was a bad move. So I am going to have some like bad moves in there. Um,
Okay.
but we need to, for now, we don't need to worry so much at that. I think we need to say, oh, here's kind of a good place to end the first episode. That's interesting. And then we can talk about how to add some, what are the mistakes that they're going to make in a game, like someone fumbling a ball in football or something like that. What are those scripted moments going to be?
So if I'm hearing you right, it's going to be two specific things we're talking about. Like one is the keto diet and the major claim. The other is also just debates in general, how to debate what's good, what's bad. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, that's, yeah. So the topic in the story will be the keto thing, but the narrative, the when we're building the production, the moral of the story that's not explicit would be, here's, teaching people how to debate more logically than emotionally. Um, but it will also be kind of explicit because you have the two, what's the term for them? I can't remember.
Interlocutors?
Commentators.
Okay.
What did you say?
Interlocutors, like the two
Oh yeah.
debaters.
No, so yeah, they'll be talking and they'll be have direct to camera responses where they'll be interviewed, what were we feeling at that moment? And they'll say, well, I can't believe you did that, because that's like, so we'll have those moments, but also there'll be the commentators, just like the football, the guys are in soccer, that like they draw on the board and they go, and he went around here and this guy was open, but they didn't throw to him because he couldn't see that he's open because the front line, that kind of analysis would also be a way. Even like someone makes a move and one of the commentators like, and then he has an aside with the other guy saying, that was a really bad move because he used an infinitive in there. He said always. And so to defeat that, the person just has to find one example, and then that's completely nullified, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Stuff like
Okay.
that. Uh
Interesting. Yeah.
but we don't have to worry about kind of those right now. I think what we need to do is find a good kind of tree of claims on, at the end of the episode, and those two commentators are reviewing where we're at. That kind of wrap up scene would be what's the map that they're looking at that moment. And they're going to also invite viewers to come in with evidence that will go on any of these leaves or anywhere in the tree. We'll talk about how to reference a node, because there should be some numbering scheme or something, or just tell them to write out and get feedback, and then also offer a prize, $100 for the person that provides the best evidence between now and the next episode.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of the claims for the keto diet argument in general, if you add some of the stuff you're saying with the commentators and changing some of the claims so they're not great moves specifically so that they can be adjusted later, that seems to say that less content is needed for the first episode. And I'm wondering if
I didn't really think about that until you just started saying that. And it's like, oh yeah, we have some 30 claims here, and you couldn't do that in an hour. I think
that's okay though. You just
yeah,
chunk it down into smaller episodes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what would be good to kind of look at this, and I did have a kind of quick question for you, and I can also share with you my script document, which I probably need to do. Let's see, is this shared? Oh, you're already on it. Maybe because it's in the folder. Maybe I haven't. Let me give you the link just in case. Put it in the, I need to put it in.
I think I have the folder link, so let me just click on it and see.
Or there's the document in our Slack.
Perfect. So it's not in the private.
Yeah, I might have it in the wrong place. It should be in the public folder.
Yeah, in the public one, I got it.
Yeah, that's fine. This can be public. People know it's scripted.
Fair enough.
What was I gonna say? Oh, so but with the evidence that you're looking at so far, who would you say is winning? Or is it phrased wrong to where we can't figure that out or something? What's your gut just from work doing it?
That is a really good question. I just want
Yeah, and about that.
Get this link in here real quick. Okay. Who's winning? Man, it's gone. I've kind of thought about this while I was doing all the research in general, because it started with, okay, we look at this source, and this source is clearly leading to one side. And so that's where the entire argument was leading, because that was the only source I looked at currently. And then the next source kind of jumped it back. So it started with the opposing side. This was kind of built out the saturated fats increase risk, and all of the reasons that Dr. Gill there had. And then it came back to the other side. So now currently, I think I'd lean for the supports. And a lot of the last stuff I did was actually just through GPT, because I just chucked it in there saying, okay, well, what does the general corpus of knowledge, according to ChatGPT, say in terms of what arguments are for or against? And it seemed like the for position, it just came with a lot more convincing arguments, where the against GPT seemed to repeat itself a lot. It seemed to be like, well, it could be this, could be that, but it wasn't very strong. I don't know if that's the inherent bias of GPT itself, or I don't know.
So when you say for that the keto diet isn't dangerous.
Correct. The supporting.
Oh, that's interesting.
The purple.
I wonder if there's more rabid people. Like the orange side is kind of pro science is the wrong word. Pro conventional science, and
consensus.
yeah, scientific
Yeah,
consensus,
yeah.
and the purple is more fringy, and there might just be more fringy content out there.
And it could be the case that I was only at like level 1 or level 2 deep. And so maybe the level 1, like let's pretend this claim saturated fats increase risk, is actually just so well substantiated that that's all there is to say, according to GPT. And I didn't go down further. And that's where we might need to go. But as it stands currently, I'd say supports is winning.
Interesting. Yeah, we might. Yeah, I haven't decided if I want to choose a side to be winning at the end of the first episode, or if just it might just come out that when we're putting the data in and we're choosing the nodes that are most interesting, it'll probably turn out that one side will be slightly ahead or above, or it wouldn't be bad if the score was exactly 50-50 at the end of that first episode, right?
Yeah, and then you could see, I feel like that's a really good strategy. Well, it'd be interesting to know the audience, how they felt beforehand, and then you could lean it one way to get a stronger reaction. It's more responses based on, like, if we said it was 90-10, but the audience was on the 10 side, they'd want to jump into it.
I mean, I imagine the majority of the people that don't care so strongly about it would end up saying that it's dangerous, because that is the consensus, and that's what your doctors tell you. If you're passionate about it, then you'd probably be passionate on the other side. Yeah,
That makes sense.
I don't know. I think maybe if the evidence is leaning one way or the other, I'm okay with it leaning. But if we're looking at, we're just having to decide to leave some things out because we don't have time, then I think shooting more towards 50-50 balance would be good.
Cool. Well, in terms of go ahead.
But I don't think we need to like count it up and make sure it's exactly 50-50 as we're going through and adding stuff. But so also the other thing to think about on choosing the items is, what is the critical path? Like there are, or paths, since it's a tree, there are some things on here that it's kind of like, well, even if that's true, it doesn't feel that important. Where do you have a feeling, like if I said, where's the nexus of this argument, where do you think's the main battleground gonna happen if we go deeper or something like that?
Well, I think this tied into two things I was going to talk about. Well, the first is, I think the first episode, this is what that was number 1 is for. Maybe if I just kind of lay out what I think might be a plausible first episode, that might help explain what you're asking. So the first, if we do, obviously, main claim, but then I think these 3, I'm not so certain about this one. It's more kind of technical and detailed. And these 2, maybe leave this out for after the fact.
Yeah.
And you might even jump into like mentioning these briefly, because saturated fats is just, I think it requires kind of talking about why saturated fats increase the risk. So maybe that. And if we start there, then I think it'll go down to one of the counters, and I think you've mentioned this too, so I think it's in your head of, well, actually, if you increase LDL, that's not causal, like this down here. And so maybe then getting into the technical of like, okay, well, what actually is happening here? And I don't actually know that. I was starting to do some research on that. Like, well, what are the actual evidence for the causal relations of increased LDL or increased ApoB in general? Or let's say, why is positive impact on insulin actually reducing your risk for CBD.
Yeah.
And so maybe, like, I don't know when you would want to get into that in the episodes of the actual technical parts of it. Because I've been doing a lot of assumptions here, especially you can see that with the aliases I've made. I just said, well, increases LDL. Well, why does that actually matter? And in fact, there's two claims in there. It actually increases LDL, which is associated with CBD. So there's two claims in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that the main kind of battleground will be how directly is increased. It may be ApoB instead of LDL, and that may be an interesting kind of flub to happen in the middle, is have the con side say LDL and the pro side say, okay, well, this part of LDL isn't considered atherogenic anymore for these studies. And then they have to go back and say, oh, let's use ApoB instead, because that's a better indicator, right? Of course, that means they then have to throw out a whole bunch of studies that don't measure ApoB. Although you could theoretically bring them in saying if they had high LDL, we assume they had high ApoB in the situation, so that study still applies. We'll have to figure that out. And then, yeah, I don't know if we can say that high insulin is. Maybe we should leave that on there, because that's one of the things I'd like to dig into, because I get the feeling that, and I don't know if the keto community is still making this claim, but they were saying that the high insulin actually is atherogenic.
Right. Positive impact to insulin might not mean high then, right? See what it means here.
Yeah, well, or I guess, yeah. Well, yeah. So it's lowering your insulin, but I guess the strengthening claim in there is that insulin directly cause atherosclerosis.
Okay.
And I don't know. I just don't know if anyone's making that claim anymore. And we may not have it. I just remember in one of the podcast episodes I listened to when I first started this, they were going back. So a lot of the insulin studies were done on dogs, and that original guy that like figured out what insulin was, he left an insulin drip in his dog's, and not his dog, in a dog's leg, one of the lab dogs, and he accidentally left it in there too long, and the dog's leg was atherosclerotic the next day, which is a very extreme thing. So I guess my gut reaction is, if I'm remembering correctly, and if people still believe this is true, is that the other side of the claim, one side is saying saturated fats directly cause damage to the artery, and I think the other side saying the high insulin causes damage to the arteries. And both are impacted by their have extra cholesterol in your bloodstream. But the keto people are saying if you lowered the insulin, that removes an oxidative stress and thus having the extra cholesterol in your bloodstream. Well, I guess there's two claims then in that case. One is you're having less stress, so less likely, even if there's all the stuff. And the second option is the cholesterol isn't in your bloodstream for very long, so it's not getting. So I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe I should list out the things that I think are still kind of interesting arguments. One is less likely is that insulin directly causes atherosclerosis, CVD. The other one is saturated fats. Saturated fats, ApoB directly cause CVD. I'm using abbreviations. And then, but the response to that is that the CVD is caused by the oxidated. So if it's not stuck in the system, it doesn't actually cause more damage. So that debate, I guess, is actually all one thread, because one side's saying it's causing the damage, and the other side's saying not in this specific situation. Does that make sense?
It does. What I found with literally briefly doing some research on what are like the leading, like it says here with the leading theories or that are causal, the response was it's very complex. It's all of these things together, right, could be the direct, and that kind of sounds a little bit like what you're saying in terms of, well, if you have this effect like insulin, high insulin, but you're not getting the time in which your LDL is in your system, well, it negates that, doesn't even matter anymore. So unraveling those threads of, okay, well, if you have X and Y, then Z will be bad. But if you don't have X, you have Y, then Z won't be bad. Like, I think there might be a few of those combinatorial threads that will be interesting to see how we unravel those. For example, was GPT's response of insulin resistance is it would lead to abnormal lipid metabolism. And I think that kind of what you're talking about in terms of LDL staying in your system for longer or less time.
So I mean, that could mean it staying in your system, but it could also mean having more of a certain size.
Okay, yeah. And then inflammation or endothelial dysfunction.
Yeah.
But it seems like when you go into look into each one of those things, it says, well, this could lead to increased this other thing, and then leads back into almost like a circular argument. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we're also going to need to, like, I have a feeling that this is the thing where I'm like, no one has ever actually debated this to this level. So I really think that at some point we're going to get stuck and it's going to be like, well, there's no evidence online because no one's actually followed. Like, it's people get bored before it gets that far down. So it may be like we literally may have to reach out to some of these researchers or to someone and see if we can convince them to respond or pay them. And actually, that might be interesting to look at some of the problem is, I don't know who would answer that, because I think scientists who do research studies, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I was thinking that they don't actually like saying what the mechanisms are. They like to just, like, it's not popular to say, like, here's the study, here's the results, and here's why we think it's happening. I mean, they do that, but I think they're very cagey about it.
I have the same intuition.
So anyone that's not cagey about it is also not going to have an answer to the question. It's almost like we need someone, and it could be a character in the story, but that seems less. I mean, maybe that's the way to do it, is I make up a fake doctor and he proposes that, and then we let the internet tell me I'm wrong. Like they say, one of the best ways to get an answer on the internet is to ask the question and then give a wrong answer.
Yeah, right.
So maybe I just need to, like, put on a lab coat and one of those mirror things that they don't use anymore.
Yeah.
Look silly.
And then approach someone who's been interviewed, so they're willing to be public about at least some of the information, and say,
Yeah.
fake doctor says you're wrong.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Yeah, so we may have to do that, but I have yeah, we may do research, but I guess I'm very doubtful that we'll actually find someone quoting saying, although in that Wikipedia article, it does say that they think it's because the the lipoproteins get oxidated, and that's because they're hanging around in the system. And it's like, well, that's exactly what the keto people are saying, that they're not hanging around in my so I mean, we could just quote that. Although once again, there's actually no reference there on who said that, or where, what does that come from. It's kind of an aside.
That's interesting then, if there's no reference. But if that's something you think is important, I can try and source one. That's
Yeah, so I think it will eventually be. The question is, do we want to get that far in episode 1?
right.
So maybe what we should do, I think you did a really good job of saying what the debate should be. Am I not looking at your... I don't see those numbers on there. I did make a copy of your debate. I wonder if I'm looking at your copy. I don't think so, though. It looks like it's been... No, I see your mouse on there.
Yeah, I see yours too. You don't see the numbers?
No.
That's
Am I not
interesting.
zoomed in enough? Hold on.
Well,
Nope.
no, they're pretty blatant.
Um,
That's wild.
yeah, do you think that that's a personal note thing? What is that, a shape,
I
or...
I didn't think there was such a thing. No, it's just a rectangle. I know there's like a share read only state, but then I shouldn't be able to see your mouse. That's
Let me just refresh and see. Oh, look at that. So,
so it just
like,
wasn't updating.
yeah,
That's definitely sounds like a bug.
yeah, which is a hard thing to do, because I was on the website, but I was on another browser, and so the browser probably shut down its communication. It didn't recognize that it missed some data.
Maybe, yeah. But your mouse was updating for me. That's weird. That doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, when I came back, yeah, so new updates happen, but there's a window in time where the app wasn't actually probably told by the browser that it lost connection. I've had trouble with some of my apps in that, where my app thinks it's been connected the whole time.
Hmm.
So you almost need to do a sync up every once in a while with the database. Did I miss anything?
Like an interval check in.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna write this down here. You said with the Wikipedia article, you want the for greater opportunity for oxidation, I think is what you were.
I mean, I quoted it earlier, the interesting bit.
Yeah, I got the quote here too. I think this is the quote you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, just they don't say where they get the idea of I quoted a big chunk of it. It's where it says oxidative.
Was it the like it says here, the opportunity for oxidation, and then the keto community is saying, well, they're not in the system long enough, like, so that reduces their opportunity because they're just not in the system as long.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, okay, so
Yeah. But it'd be good to know the source of where someone somewhere on the con side said, oh, and it's happening because they're getting oxidized.
that's an interesting rabbit hole. Like from the top of my head, based on the stuff I've done, seems like it can get oxidized when it's in the wall as well as when it's not in the wall. And so I need to disentangle that.
Yeah.
Which one of those is true or not, or where I got those from.
But I think with either of those being true, it's still based on a probability over time. Like, so
That's
they're
true.
not all
Yeah,
100% immediately, right?
that makes sense.
And then they mentioned scavenger receptors, which is also what the lady, the researcher on the pro side was talking about.
This will be interesting, and I don't understand this well enough yet. So Feldman's, what does he call it? Like his answer to the lipid hypothesis with the VLDL getting changed and used and then getting changed into LDL, and then that LDL is no longer poses as great of a risk, but I'm not sure why or how that ties into the length of time that LDL is in this system.
Yeah, I think it's because the LDL, and I think he mentions it in one of the video things, that it then goes to get filtered out in the kidney. So I think the kind of unspoken,
This part here, if you see my screen,
yeah,
VLDL coming out as LDL. This is whole
or you
idea
could
of,
just say that the type of LDL particles those aren't the ones. Like if they're not the ApoB or not the ApoB, I saw in one of them they said ApoB 100. So that's a specific type of ApoB.
from what I read, I thought that when people say ApoB, they're just referencing ApoB 100 because that is the actual something
So
like
that's
this.
just the longer name of it.
I think so.
Okay.
But I remember seeing that too, and I was like, well, what does that mean?
It's funny because they talk about the scavenger receptors and they're saying that that's part of the process. But I would think the whole reason for the scavenger receptors is to get rid of it. I don't know why that's a bad thing. But that's probably,
Sorry, say that again. The scavenger receptors get rid of.
you would think the whole point of the scavenger, yeah, is to get rid of the LDL particles. Or at least the bad, quote, bad ones. So why are they hanging around being oxidized? It's just, I don't know why there's. It sometimes when they're explaining things, they introduce terms and processes that actually are not important. Like a lot of these things that they talk about in here actually have like hundreds of steps, and they're
Yeah.
abbreviating them, and they're removing some that aren't important. Like it goes from here to here. We don't care about all the median steps,
Yeah.
but sometimes they include some steps that actually don't need to be included. And it's like the person's just sitting around trying to explain it, and they don't think about, is this useful in this sentence?
That's very true. Yeah. In terms
Then a
of
couple,
the
yeah,
scavenger receptors, my understanding still needs a lot of work, is that, and I think it says it here somewhere, but that the particles that generally aren't received by the scavenger receptors have been changed some way, like oxidized. I think there might have been some other, they damaged in some way. So then the scavenger receptors take them in, and that shouldn't happen because that's then what forms, plaque in your arteries or atherosclerosis or what have you. Does that track with you too, or?
I mean, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
So the what they're saying is they get oxidized, the scavenger receptors pick them up, and and that's, even though that's something the body has in place, it's kind of causing this accidental impact of a buildup of, and that's what's building the plaque or whatever, or the inflammation.
Yeah.
Which we're not clear which, or they're not clear when they talk about these things.
It could be both.
Yeah, so that would be interesting, but that's still all kind of, yeah, that all kind of leads to the thing of the assumption, which I don't have any evidence for this, but is that, yeah, but if you're eating and using a lot of fat, then it seems like the things would get through the whole cycle without having to be scavenged and without being oxidized.
Well, and that's the part of Feldman's, is the energy hypothesis he has. I don't understand lipid energy model. So when you have high LDL, it's because the VLDL is being used, like you're suggesting. That's what I'm hearing when you say
Yeah,
that.
he
I'm
does
not sure
mention
if
the
that's
high
right.
turnover there.
Yeah, but then you still have a ton of LDL particles. And I don't understand why that's why he believes that's not a problem when it seems like the con side believes that is a problem. And I'm curious to answer that question. He might have said it and I just missed it. That's very highly likely. Or he said it
Although
in
I
other
see
places that I
several
haven't
times
seen yet.
where he's talking and he just does not follow the logic all the way to the end. I think there's some things he doesn't want to say because it freaks the people that don't believe him yet. So he kind of just doesn't go there.
Yeah, I could understand that reasoning too.
Although
So
in the end,
maybe I'm
makes
gonna
his,
write that down as
yeah.
Yeah.
Although the problem is in the end, it means he doesn't actually make up a finished claim. Like it sounds good, it's convincing, but it's not actually logically sound, and no one should believe it. It just sounds good. And I'm not saying there isn't a there. I'm just saying he doesn't explicitly say what's there. But I think somewhere in his talk he says, and then they go to the kidney to be filtered out.
Yeah, exactly. It could, I could have just not connected that yet.
Although you think he would put it explicitly. Or he's saying those are the good LDL, because I think now they're saying not all LDL is bad, right?
That I'm not aware of. I remember we have a claim on there that says something about the size of them.
Okay, so that's
but,
yeah, so I think that's what he's saying in this chart. So there's the
this year, I think.
yeah, so he's saying they're VLDLs, and then when they come out, they're LDL. And I think a lot of people are agreeing now that LDL are only slightly atherogenic. That's the VLDLs that are atherogenic. And he's saying that they spend very little time in the VLDL stage, but there's a high volume.
Yeah, area of ongoing research, according to this ChatGPT response.
Yeah. But I think, and that's also one of the problems where, they use the term LDL and then later they came up with the term VLDL. So in the past, LDL included VLDL, but now in this context, he's saying these are LDLs that are non-VLDL. But he doesn't say that. They don't say that. No one's that explicit. They just use these terms where they know what they're talking about. Okay. So I think we'll end up digging into all that. I really think at some point I'm going to have the announcers, the commentators show a video explaining this.
Yeah, no, it's
Because I don't think people looking at this is going to make understanding. And I kind of feel like, and so here's a graphic. Or, you know what would be better? To have him to be drawing it on a piece of glass with one of those pens that look really bright. So it looks like a game. And this goes here and have little X's and O's everywhere.
I think the more visualizations, the more multimedia you can add to explain the technical things is huge, will be hugely beneficial. Actually, just recently watched a debate on abiogenesis. And I think it's very similar to what you're saying here, where people just haven't debated these things. Like there's kind of very technical research, someone who opposes that research, but those two haven't met. Well, in this case, they did. And there wasn't a lot of these visuals for the layperson to understand. You just have to be like, well, I trust my side. So obviously he's right. And your side is obviously wrong because I don't trust him. But I actually don't know because I don't know the technical details of it. And I think that would help bypass that.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting, though, is with the scoring system, it may be as interesting and as informative without you actually understanding the details. Just because you'll see one expert make a claim and the other expert defeat it. And then you know that that first expert never came back and undefeated it. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Because a lot of times they'll go back and forth and it's like, well, I can't keep scoring my head of who's winning because I don't know what they're saying.
100%.
But if there is an actual score, it might still be a little interesting, even though you don't understand the technical stuff. But it'd be better to understand the technical stuff. I just haven't figured out. It'll be interesting to see if when we do the debate, whether it'll be clear, because maybe saying, oh, here's a claim that the VLDL gets converted back into LDL frequently enough that it doesn't have time to be oxidized. If that's a claim, maybe that's clear enough. And maybe if you don't use VLDL and you just went back to bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, or you simplify it even more and don't even mention it changing from one to the other and just say it is processed through the system fast enough that it doesn't have time to oxidize. And it's the oxidized ones that are causing the damage. And so that's why if you're talking about a carb eater, a whole bunch of cholesterol is bad. But if you're talking about a keto eater, a whole bunch of cholesterol isn't necessarily bad.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. So there may not be the need for, although a graphic still might be interesting to do, even if it's not necessary. Okay. So, these ones that you've marked in the thing, I guess so. We should probably look at those and see whether maybe is that where we want the debate to maybe end, maybe add a few children underneath it. That's probably a good handful number of moves. And with all the other explanations, that would still probably be 30 minutes.
It's almost like though the tree with levels underneath the ones that I've tagged doesn't sound like it actually would fit the format you're talking about, because that's a straight line. But the format you're talking about doesn't sound like a straight line. It sounds like let's say all of these number ones are introduced in the first episode, but then it's like, okay, well, the people on the con side are going to combat two of these. They're going to combat these two, let's say, which maybe isn't a direct straight line. It's going to crisscross and go more like not like a graph database. I don't know. That's just a thought I had.
Yeah, I mean, if they're crisscrossing, then I think we're not phrasing them correctly. And so in this place where you have things, I mean, there are situations where things do affect two things. Although in that case, I often just make them two different objects.
Yeah, I was going
for
to
the
talk to you about these two.
visualization.
This bothers me.
So, but the problem with that is, I mean, the reason that you have that problem though, is that because raises ApoB and increases LDL are actually the same thing, right? They're just two different phrases. So that's really where your problem is. Anyways, so back up again. What would the score be if we used this, just the ones you have marked? So right now we have 3, 4, 2 against. I guess the problem is if in this chart we don't have anyone attacking the other person except for the orange attacking. We don't have an attack of an attack. So I'd like to go down one more level.
That'd be the only one. Well, these two. Is that what you're saying?
Well, even the purple ones underneath increases LDL, although we may not be able to use those. Can you? Oh wait, where's my mouse? Where's my screen? Hold on. Where's my screen?
Oh, I see. You're saying
all of these are technically an attack on it. Well, this is an attack on here, and then they're attacked again down here.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, there's kind of a problem with this. Oh, you know what? We would need one of these attacks because the orange side is not going to defend this unless there's an attack on it.
The orange side's not going to defend which?
So, okay, so imagine the move. So we start out with this one. The other side, the orange side says saturated fat increases heart disease. They're not going to bother saying that it increases. They're already winning. They have 100% confidence on this one.
Yeah.
So until they're attacked by one of these, they're not going to have a reason to defend with one of those.
That makes sense. You could get away with not adding it by, if you wanted to, by getting into like more of the technical or the details. Like, let's say the opposite side says saturated fats increase risk, and the support side says, well, why? That's all they say. It's just like,
Yeah, we can
explain yourself.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of hate doing that,
Okay, that's fine. It was just a possible
but that's
option.
definitely an option. It's just that seems like you could just keep asking why all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd almost want them to say saturated fats increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. Well, okay, on this one, I think let's assume that they would need some evidence for that. So they would probably have a study, right? So then when they do that study, then the other side would come back and say, well, there were no, and then we kind of start attacking the study. Which is
Well,
beside the
it,
point
it
though.
yeah, it does sound like that's two separate branches, but you did want some branches that could be beneficial. Like here's the study. Well, the study is not important because, but the other attack is saturated fats are believed to increase CVD because they increase LDL, but it actually LDL isn't causal. So that seems like two separate chains.
Yeah, one of the way we might be able to get down to that though is to say saturated fats increase the source of heart disease. Here's the study. And then if the other side comes by, well, if that study says, if that's a study that said we watched, 100 people for a year, and when they ate more saturated fats, they had more LDL, then the con side or the purple side would come up and say that study claims that LDL. I mean, so we may have to reverse that one and make it actually purple and say that LDL does not cause, because there, I guess what I'm saying, the increases the LDL and the LDL causes cardiovascular disease. Those are kind of assumptions in the saturated fats study. Maybe
If that's what the study says,
if that's the type of stuff, if it's
yeah.
and if it's, I mean, right. The other study it could be would be a longitudinal study, and in that case, the debate against that would be, you didn't have any people on keto in that study.
I imagine a study that said it increased LDL would also link to other studies saying, well, LDL also
Yeah,
does this. So it might just be built into like the
but those would,
references.
yeah. So, but eventually it'd point back to a correlational study.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the attack on that one would be both. First of all, there was no one keto in there, and then the other attack would be, yeah. So I guess it depends on what study that is. But yeah,
Okay,
I
so
think
that sounds like an
below,
action item for me to
yeah. So I
find
think
some
we need to
studies
choose
and then go
evidence
from there.
for all of those, all the ones you've marked.
Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I think that's will help kind of um, direct the narrative.
but that may be a good place. Now on your purple ones over here on the left side, the improved markers of metabolic syndrome and effective for weight loss are, I wonder if how much of an overlap that is.
I remember you mentioned that. I think they were separated because there's
Did it?
specific supports for metabolic syndrome that are not for weight loss. I think. You can see here.
I guess yeah, I mean, I think you could map it either way. Because I think weight is a measurement of
Of metabolic syndrome.
metabolic syndrome. You could map it either way. And I guess what I'm saying is that I'd almost rather lump them together because
You're right. Yeah.
of course insulin is part of the metabolic syndrome too, but I'd almost want to say on that claim, instead of the positive impact on insulin, is change that to say insulin high insulin levels cause atherosclerosis. And maybe we can prove that is wrong at some point.
The insulin.
Although, you know what? I'd have to
couldn't-
find a study for that though, and I don't think there is one.
The sorry, lost myself. The insulin, the resistance of insulin, the pros and cons, I think, have different, had multiple effects. Where was I doing that? That was, according to ChatGPT, said that a lot. Was here. So insulin resistance led to those three: the abnormal lipid metabolism, inflammation, and endothelial dysfunction. So multifaceted, again, that whole complex relationship tree.
What are you suggesting?
I was
We
just
should leave them separate or?
no, I agree with you.
Okay.
Putting those two together, putting
Lumping
metabolic
those
syndrome and weight loss together. Yes.
Let's see what Bing says about high levels.
Unless weight loss itself supports our main claim, apart from metabolic syndrome. Because could it be the case that weight loss is one of the features of metabolic syndrome, or like obesity is? But you could, I'm trying to work this out in my head with the words. You could not have metabolic syndrome, but you could be obese, and that would increase your risk. So that means weight loss itself decreases your risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There might be times where you would still kind of lump them together just so they have less of an impact. So you might say it has positive effects, and then you'd break them out into separate things. I don't know if we need to go there yet.
Okay, I'll just combine them and not try to overthink it.
I hate how they call this insulin resistance.
Hmm.
Um, so I asked Bing, which is nice because it tends to give you links. High levels of insulin in the bloodstream can cause or contribute to atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of plaque in large blood vessels. But I don't know if I actually find that. High insulin levels hasten plaque buildup in the large blood vessels, causing, not that there's a link. High levels of insulin sensitivity are associated with less atherosclerosis in Hispanic and non-Hispanic whites, but not blacks.
My question is, what's the difference between the levels of insulin and resistance/sensitivity to insulin?
Yeah, see,
Is there a difference in what
they're
is it?
conflating several things here. So they're assuming you have high levels of insulin because you have insulin resistance. There could be other reasons for a high level of insulin. But generally that is the cause. It's just I don't know why they choose to phrase things in the less useful way. This may be due to the associated metabolic abnormalities that occur with insulin resistance, such as hypertension. See,
I'm telling you,
they say
cycle in
can
which it
cause.
goes.
They say can cause, and then they say may be due to associated metabolic abnormalities. If it's done by associated metabolic abnormalities, then it cannot be the cause. It's like those two sentences are diametrically opposed. And I'm not just saying ChatGPT isn't just hallucinating here. This is the way people talk. This causes this. Now, it might be all the secondary conditions. It's like, well, if it's the secondary conditions, it doesn't. Like, it's not. They just can't speak clearly. Anyway, so this is, I would like to make the claim that high insulin itself, and maybe insulin resistance as a proxy of that, directly causes heart disease. Meaning it's not because you gained weight,
Yeah,
you had high insulin, or you had high insulin because you gained weight, but actually the insulin is damaging the walls or causing, the insulin is causing oxidative stress. So I'd like that to be one of the claims, and hopefully I'll just be proven wrong somewhere.
specifically by mechanism of oxidative stress.
I mean, if there's other mechanisms, that's fine, but I don't want it to be one of these stupid secondary things.
Would it be sufficient to say for this use case that just insulin is causal to CVD?
I'd want to say directly causal, but yeah.
Okay.
Because that's the hidden claim that a lot of keto people imply. Even though they don't say that. There's some evidence that high levels of insulin can cause or worsen oxidative stress in the body. So there you go. 3 studies, 4 studies. Could be hallucinating.
But why are we adding that? Because,
well, rather than saying what was the other one that you had? Well, because I think it's true.
right,
but do you need a better reason than that?
How does it relate?
No, so instead of the positive,
question.
Instead of positive impact of insulin, I'd like to replace that with high levels of insulin, and thus Well, okay, yeah, the phrasing may be wrong because it's directly. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how's the chain go there? I
It's
mean,
the
basically, what I'm
it's just
trying to.
the opposite of what you're saying. It
Yeah.
reduces insulin, reduces whatever of insulin because an
Reduces.
insulin has the
Right.
oxidative effect.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's the mechanism of that claim.
Yeah. So this claim really, yeah, it's eating keto reduces the amount of insulin in your bloodstream. Insulin has a atherogenesis effect. Athero something. Yeah. So I'd like to have that as one of the claims. And then choose a study. So yeah, if you'd want to try and find studies to put underneath those, and then maybe choose one level down if you want.
So find studies for one level down of each of the listed
Well, I guess
numbered claims.
definitely find studies for the ones you marked, and then I guess maybe we just need to come back and, well, I guess one thing I'd want to do is put this in reason score so we can see what the score is going to be. I don't know. Maybe I should go ahead and start writing the script based on this, and then we'll stop if we have a problem, because we do need an attack on this. So I guess one thing to look for is if you have like a chain of 3 pros or 3 cons, there has to be there has to be an attack in order for someone to defend a claim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no narrative reason to. They're just wasting a move if they already have 100% score on that.
Yeah. So because of the score, and that talks about how I was kind of making assumptions here, like with this keto decreases HDLC. Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
if you want to spend time doing this, you can go to reason score, I guess. Reason score /edit brings up a new blank claim. Now, I haven't given you write access to the database, but if you download it as you go, you can always upload a version and it'll be back in there. And so you can start putting, even if you just want to put those 1-word or 2-word summaries in there, just to see what the score would be.
Yeah, cool.
But I think it'll, just looking at it, it might still be a little too boring. We may have to pull in something else. But maybe I should try writing the script first and then, because yeah, in 30 minutes, because I also have to do I have to like interview myself about the question, show them rewording the question. I mean, I guess we don't have to. You could start it with the debate to get it kind of exciting and then, do kind of and this is how we got to this question. But I need to write those scenes and then we can move them around.
Yeah, one of the questions we should ask ourselves with writing this first episode is there enough of a hook for people to watch the second episode? And what is that hook? Is it introductory to the entire debate, introductory to keto, enough information about what's going to happen, the context of like how you're playing the narrative back and forth as type of a survival show?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to do, although it doesn't quite make sense in this scenario, but I don't think people will notice, is that, at the end of one episode, they often have scenes from the next episode.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make sense in this scenario because I'm having the audience give information on the next episode. So if I film the next episode, it doesn't make sense. But I doubt people think that far into it. So
Yeah.
to think about what are some other moves that might cause people to go, oh, like that, like I wanted to have one of them say, there is no evidence that that study ever existed. And have the other team like looking around to his researcher and kind of like yelling at each other. What? So I don't know what, something like, and have that be a scene of for next week, right? So we maybe,
Yeah, absolutely. I was just
yeah,
going to say there was a recent law case that ChatGPT hallucinated some
yeah, well,
cases that
that's
didn't
right.
actually exist. So it's like,
Right.
yeah, that could be a
Yeah,
thing. Just
I'm sorry, it didn't exist.
yeah.
Yeah. So stuff like that. So little vignettes to use as scenes from next week, to make it a little bit more interesting. And then also, if if people actually do submit evidence. Oh, and just kind of like a funny thing in the script is like in the intro, like you know, in the game shows they have the announcers and they're talking it up and like that. And I just think and they're gonna be one step closer to $500. Don't like make it sound like a lot of money. It's like, $500? That's not. And the reason for $500 though is that if you pay someone in the US over $600, you have to pay their taxes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I know that.
So then later, if I do this debate for real and get real people to participate in it, I want to keep the dollar amount low enough that it just is easier. And if they're doing it for the money, it's not that fun anyways. But yeah, that's one of the kind of fun things, I think. We'll see. Yeah, okay. So I'll try writing up some of the first few moves. And maybe so I'll start filling this in based on the ones you've done. But yeah, as you find the studies or reword the phrases, let me know.
Will do. I'm just finishing writing something here. What claims those could we have to gain audience? Interaction, attention. So for my kind of next actions going forward is finding claims for all of the marked claims as well as one level down from those.
Well, if you see any one level down ones that look interesting, actually, maybe just take that off your list. Just find studies or evidence for the claims that you've marked.
Okay, just the claims. Okay. Combining metabolic syndrome with weight loss, it's quick change and changing the insulin one to add oxidative stress, and then adding episode 1 claims to reason score to see kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking about doing, and let me know if you think this is a good idea or not, is taking summaries from the YouTube sources we currently have that I haven't gone through yet, taking those summaries and putting them into ChatGPT, saying, here's our argument map that we currently have. Based on this summary, is there anything you think we should add to it? To kind of like, well, the first step would be looking at the summary and saying, well, is this relevant to us or not? And I can probably chuck it away or go into it based on that. And if it is relevant, running it through ChatGPT to say, what should I be looking for here?
Yeah. Another thing that might be useful on that same front is if you can think of any video snippets of people saying things that are similar to the claims that we're writing. Or an article, something either to pop up on the screen. So either a video or a BuzzFeed article or something.
Yeah.
To pop up on the screen when the person's making the claim.
That would be awesome, but I can't think of an efficient way to do that other than like stumbling upon it serendipitously.
Well, I think we might take a few of the words and search through the video transcripts you have so far and see if someone says insulin resistance and then look at those sections. It may not work though. But if you think of any when you're doing it.
This is where technology would really come in handy. If you've seen that, I think we've talked about it before, but that Huberman podcast where someone took it and ran it through a vector. So you can search through all of his podcasts ever with a vector search. That would be incredible in this scenario. Or
now Jamie from Society Library at one point has access to a word search of a whole bunch of news broadcasts. It still is just single words or groups of words, but that might get us somewhere at some point. I don't think it'll work in this case though. But if you're reading through it and you remember that this person made a similar claim, jot them down. We'll see. That'll probably be after I write the scripts, is finding things to pop up on the screen while they're talking.
And that will just be, I could integrate it too, just into the workflow, maybe for the future of, as we're adding quotes as a node, those would be exactly that. So
yeah, and I mean, maybe even doing a search through your quotes and seeing if any of the keywords are used and for the right side.
We added it just recently, and I haven't been using it as much yet, unfortunately. The last round of edits were doing the alias and combining claims, and
not a big deal.
but that,
or once we get them, we could probably just search on that text and see if we can find anyone. Like, I think if you search YouTube, they're starting to have it to where the search goes into the transcripts. So it might pop something up.
Yeah, it absolutely might.
But we might do that later.
Other stuff I had was, let me just quickly see what is worth adding here currently, because we are over an hour. I do notice. It was these two claims that I kind of mentioned that have their supports for two other things, but you already mentioned, I think, that it's just because you should combine like the APOB and the LDL. And the other one was for two studies, which I think I probably could do the same thing, but I found how much more difficult it was than I imagined of putting claims where they should go in the hierarchy, especially if they're related to two opposing claims. I thought initially that was just going to be easy, like it would clearly make sense, everything just logically fits, so it's there. That's just not the case.
Yeah, I think I was surprised at how often things do also just logically overlap. And there are some cases where you just have to let them overlap. But yeah, the world is not as simple as we hoped.
Yeah. One other thing I wrote down here is that utilizing LDL efficiently, but I think that is inherent with one of the tasks I have, is finding a source for that, actually finding like who made this claim and what does it actually mean. And I think that'll be in the source itself. Yeah. So
I mean, I imagine that means using that it's not getting backed up, so it's not hanging around to be oxidized, right? So it might be just another way of saying that.
Yeah, not hanging around to be I listed this a while back. I don't know why, just that I had three claims combined into one. So. Never mind that. And that was it. So, cool. Yeah, very good. Thank you for this and taking the time for this, because it was very informative and will direct my next actions, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you helping me with all this. Hopefully we'll actually make a video at the end of it, at least a script.
At least a script. Yeah. Cool. Right. See you tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah.
Where is CDL?
Okay. CDL. Yep.
Okay.
Bye.